Hand her over, engineer, and you walk away today." The voice rolled through the abandoned mining station before anyone even saw the soldiers who had spoken it. And that was the exact moment I first noticed the human called Lucas Walker. My name is Commander Rithvaris of the Imperial Security Corps. Until that day, I believed humans were nothing more than useful workers. They repaired damaged equipment, followed instructions, and stayed out of Imperial affairs whenever they could. Lucas Walker shattered every one of those assumptions in less than 5 minutes. The frontier mining station drifted alone above a cold asteroid belt, nearly 40 million miles from the nearest inhabited colony. Most companies had written it off years ago, but Lucas refused to leave. While corporations chased richer mining fields elsewhere, he stayed behind, maintaining machines that everyone else had already forgotten. To us, he was simply the station's last engineer. Our mission had nothing to do with him. A small unidentified shuttle had dropped from orbit only minutes before we arrived, tearing through an unused cargo hangar. Intelligence had flagged the lone survivor as priority 1. We were ordered to recover her immediately. When my team pushed into the wrecked hangar, we expected frightened survivors waiting to be rescued. Instead, we found one human kneeling beside a wounded alien woman pinned beneath twisted support beams. Lucas never once glanced at the insignia on her damaged uniform. He never searched for identification. He checked her breathing, steadied the emergency harness around her shoulder, and carefully lifted a broken control panel away using nothing but a portable jack from his engineering kit. His movements were calm, practiced, almost bored. It looked less like a rescue and more like another ordinary repair job. I keyed the station loudspeakers. "Human engineer, step away from the survivor immediately." Lucas turned toward the sound without a trace of fear. "She needs medical treatment." "She belongs to the Empire," I answered. "She belongs in a hospital," he said quietly, sliding the unconscious alien onto an emergency cargo sled. My officers advanced across the hangar. Lucas glanced up at a network of rusted transport rails hanging beneath the ceiling, rails that hadn't moved in years. Every Imperial database listed them as permanently out of service. He walked to a faded maintenance panel half buried in dust, pried off a small cover, and pressed a single mechanical switch. Deep inside the station, enormous motors woke with a low hum. Overhead lights stuttered as reserve generators synchronized for the first time in years. The ancient cargo rail rolled back to life. Massive transport platforms glided over our heads, carrying empty freight containers untouched for decades. My officers instinctively stepped back as the station's own safety systems reclaimed the hangar. Lucas secured the rescue sled onto one of the moving platforms, climbed aboard beside the unconscious alien, and pulled a manual departure lever. The platform surged down the overhead rail before anyone could reach him. "Cut them off," I ordered. Patrol teams flooded the surrounding corridors, expecting the human to trap himself in a station with limited exits. Instead, every intersection seemed to shift the instant we arrived. Freight elevators opened on the wrong levels. Conveyor belts restarted just long enough to redirect us. Maintenance doors sealed behind us while others opened ahead of Lucas, as though the station itself recognized him. None of it was accident. Lucas wasn't escaping through the station. He was guiding us through a place he understood far better than we ever could. Standing inside a maze of aging machinery and forgotten systems, watching that cargo platform vanish into the distance with the wounded alien, I realized for the first time in my career that we had made a serious mistake. We thought we were hunting one ordinary human. In truth, we had walked into the only place in the galaxy where that human knew every bolt, every wire, every hidden passage, and every machine still willing to answer when he quietly asked it for help. The platform carried Lucas and the wounded alien past the active mining sectors, and into a forgotten maintenance district No imperial blueprint had marked in years. By the time our patrols reached the last recorded junction, he had already disappeared into a maze of engineering tunnels built long before the station was ever automated. I expected panic. Instead, the human moved with the ease of someone walking through his own home. He guided the platform into an aging repair bay where faded safety signs still hung beside shelves of neatly organized tools. Dust covered everything except the equipment Lucas obviously maintained every week. He lifted the unconscious alien onto an examination table and reconnected power to an old medical scanner that had no business still working. A single replacement fuse from his toolbox brought the whole system back. The display began tracking her condition. Minutes later, the alien opened her eyes. Her breathing steadied as she took in the unfamiliar room, then settled on the human beside the console. "You should have left me," she whispered. Lucas checked the readings before answering. "That wouldn't have fixed the problem." She studied him, confused. "Do you even know who I am?" He tightened a loose connector beneath the medical unit without looking up. "Not yet." She hesitated. "My name is Lyra." Before he could answer, warning lights flashed across every wall in the repair bay. My teams had begun sealing engineering sectors one by one, trying to trap them inside shrinking zones. I ordered our technicians to seize control of the network, but every request came back the same. Local engineering authority remained assigned to Lucas Walker. The station obeyed his commands first. Lucas noticed the alarms but showed no concern. He crossed to an old environmental control cabinet, rested a hand against the housing, and listened. At first I thought he was checking for electrical damage. Then I understood he was listening to coolant moving through hidden pipes behind the walls. He nudged a single manual pressure valve, no more than an inch, and restored balanced circulation. The effect hit us almost at once. Our thermal scanners began reporting false heat signatures throughout empty storage areas. Motion sensors picked up movement where no one stood. Search teams changed direction again and again, chasing harmless temperature shifts from restored air moving through forgotten ducts. Lucas hadn't hacked our equipment. He had simply repaired the station so well that it naturally confused technology built for predictable environments. Lyra watched him, curiosity growing. "How did you know that would happen?" He replaced a worn air filter. "Machines tell you everything if you stop interrupting them." She was quiet a moment. Then, "Lucas Walker." He stopped working. "I never told you my name." She realized instantly what she'd let slip and lowered her eyes. Before he could press, the medical console flagged a coming pressure imbalance in the Eastern Coolant Network, nearly 5 minutes before any station alarm would have caught it. Lyra glanced at the display once. "You should check that line now." Lucas hurried to the nearest panel and confirmed the rising pressure exactly where she'd pointed. He corrected it before any automatic warning appeared. When he returned, he looked at her with quiet curiosity rather than suspicion. "How did you know which pipe was failing?" She looked away. Some answers create more problems than they solve. Standing in the command center, watching another careful search fall apart, I understood our mission had become something far larger than recovering one survivor. The alien clearly knew things she shouldn't. Yet the human beside her was harder to understand still, because every impossible discovery simply became another problem he calmly chose to solve. The unanswered question hung between them as the warning lights faded. Neither spoke of it again. Lucas had learned the alien somehow knew his name and could predict failures inside a station she'd supposedly never seen. Lyra had discovered something equally strange. This human accepted impossible events without demanding impossible explanations. Instead of interrogating her, he went back to repairing the equipment keeping her alive. "If these systems fail later, someone else might need them," he said, swapping a worn pressure regulator. "You repair everything, even now." He smiled slightly. Broken things don't fix themselves. Inside the command center, I ordered a complete change of strategy. Thermal imaging was useless. Environmental sensors couldn't be trusted. Automated mapping gave conflicting results. We deployed compact reconnaissance drones, programmed to navigate on their own through ducts and abandoned shafts. Unlike soldiers, they needed no doors and no corridors. One of them finally found the repair bay by picking up the faint sound of powered tools. The camera showed Lucas working beside the medical station while Lyra recovered nearby. Everything looked ordinary until Lucas suddenly turned toward a polished coolant pipe on the wall. He couldn't possibly have seen the drone tucked above the ceiling vent. Yet he reached for a long inspection pole leaning against the cabinet, and without striking or damaging the machine, gently guided it toward an automated inspection lift beside the wall. The lift carried the drone into a shielded maintenance shaft built decades earlier to isolate sensitive electronics from interference. Our feed died instantly. Lucas set the pole back in its bracket and kept tightening a valve as if nothing had happened. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You knew someone was watching. He nodded without looking up. It reflected light for half a second. By the time our recovery team reached the repair bay, it stood empty. Warm diagnostic displays still glowed beside the neat tools, suggesting they'd left only moments before. Then a technician replayed the last security recording frame by frame. Lucas and Lyra hadn't hidden in secret rooms or slipped through concealed passages. They had simply walked beside an autonomous maintenance robot, pushing an ordinary equipment cart toward another corridor. Every patrol had ignored them because they looked like routine maintenance staff on a scheduled job. The simplest disguise on the station was acting like they belonged there. A few corridors away, they entered an abandoned communications workshop lined with obsolete relay arrays and dusty consoles. Lucas spotted a damaged power regulator beneath the central terminal, swapped in a cracked relay from his toolbox, and restored power to the room. Ancient holographic displays lit one after another, revealing navigation systems no official record even mentioned. Lyra stepped toward the central console almost by instinct. Before Lucas could ask what she meant to do, she pressed a hand to an authentication panel. Brilliant symbols spread across every display as encrypted star charts and command interfaces woke together. Lucas frowned. I thought this network was permanently disabled. It only responds to executive authorization, Lyra answered, then caught herself. Silence filled the workshop. She slowly withdrew her hand. Lucas studied the glowing displays for a few seconds, then calmly disconnected the primary relay from every external transmitter. Nobody else needs to see this yet, he said. Watching that last feed vanish from my display, I realized we'd spent hours convinced the greatest mystery aboard the station was the wounded alien. We were wrong. The greatest mystery had become the ordinary human engineer who met impossible discoveries with the same calm attention he gave every loose bolt and failing machine. Commander Drax arrived less than 20 minutes after the workshop dropped off our surveillance grid. Unlike the officers already combing the station, he never raised his voice, never rushed, and never underestimated the human. His flagship docked with silent precision as 20 members of the Imperial Honor Guard stepped aboard in perfect formation, each carrying the newest navigation systems, synchronized tactical displays, and advanced scanners. Watching them assemble, I believed the pursuit would finally end. Drax studied the station map for a moment, then asked one quiet question. Who maintains this facility? Lucas Walker, I said. He's the only full-time engineer left. Drax nodded, then stopped chasing the human, chased the systems he refuses to abandon. At that exact moment, Lucas and Lyra were slipping out of the communications workshop through an engineering passage that led toward the oldest manufacturing district. The corridor opened into an enormous fabrication hall where overhead cranes, magnetic freight carriers, and gravity balancing equipment had once moved thousands of tons of refined ore. Most visitors would have seen abandoned machinery. Lucas saw equipment that still worked because he'd refused to neglect it. Lyra scanned the endless rows of machines, uneasy. There are too many open spaces here. Lucas looked up at the faded safety lights stretching across the ceiling. Only if you walk through the middle. Before she could ask more, Imperial Guard units entered from every direction, spreading through the hall to cut off every escape route. Their formation was disciplined and mathematically precise. Drax watched from an elevated platform. "The human can't outmaneuver 20 elite soldiers," one officer remarked. Drax said nothing. Lucas walked to an old control pillar beside an inactive cargo crane. Instead of reaching for a weapon, he opened a faded cabinet, took out a heavy mechanical key, and unlocked a manual control panel older than anyone on my team. A single steel lever sat inside. He pulled it down with both hands. Deep beneath the fabrication floor, enormous counterweights woke. After years of silence, massive motors climbed to speed as the station entered industrial freight handling mode. Overhead cranes followed transport routes programmed decades earlier. Magnetic carriers crossed suspended rails. Gravity stabilizers redistributed weight across the production zones, exactly as they had during active mining. Nothing malfunctioned. Nothing turned dangerous. The building simply went back to the job it was built for. Lucas stepped onto a narrow yellow walkway reserved for engineering personnel and crossed it with the confidence of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. The guard moved to follow, but automated freight platforms kept sliding between the squads on their restored schedules. Safety barriers descended whenever heavy equipment changed direction, separating one formation from another without trapping anyone. Navigation systems kept recalculating safe routes as the gravity equipment shifted floor loads by inches. The soldiers stayed perfectly safe, yet every coordinated advance grew slower and more fragmented by the minute. Lucas and Lyra crossed the hall calmly, while the guard waited on ordinary industrial safety cycles to finish. "You planned all of this?" Lyra asked, amazed. Lucas shook his head. "No, the engineers who built this place planned it 40 years ago. I only kept it working." Drax watched the human vanish through another access point and folded his hands behind his back. For the first time that day, even he smiled, not the smile of a man amused by failure, but of a commander who had finally understood the battlefield. "We thought we were fighting one engineer. In truth, we were up against every careful repair, every forgotten inspection, and every ordinary decision he had quietly made during years when no one thought his work mattered." They left the fabrication hall through a service corridor hidden behind a row of inactive hydraulic compressors, entering one of the oldest engineering sectors on the station. Here the walls showed decades of repairs layered over older repairs, every pipe marked with handwritten inspection notes instead of digital labels. Lucas slowed almost at once, not from fear of pursuit, but because something caught his attention. He rested his fingertips against a coolant line along the ceiling. "This vibration is different." Lyra looked around the empty corridor. "You can hear that?" He nodded. "One circulation pump is working harder than the others. If it keeps at it, the environmental system will overload." Even with the Empire searching every deck, the humans stayed focused on keeping the station alive. Drax received a report describing Lucas repairing machinery instead of running. Some officers dismissed it as a distraction. Drax didn't. "He's not repairing machines because he has time," he said. "He repairs them because he can't ignore a problem once he notices it." Rather than tighten the perimeter again, Drax repositioned his patrols around the environmental control complex, betting the human would turn up there. Minutes later, Lucas did, but not for the reason anyone expected. He opened a cabinet, pulled an aging pressure regulator, cleaned years of dust from its filter, and restored balanced airflow. Across 3 engineering sectors, the ventilation network went noticeably quiet. Lyra stared. "You just made life easier for the people chasing us." Lucas slid the repaired regulator back into place. "Everybody breathes the same air." She looked at him a long moment, then adjusted the damaged collar of her field uniform. A thin silver chain slipped into view, a small circular medallion hanging from it, an elegant star wrapped in intricate geometric patterns, unlike any military insignia I had ever seen. Lucas noticed it only because light from an observation window caught its surface. The emblem snagged on a loose strap and nearly dropped to the floor. He caught it before it touched the walkway and handed it back without looking at it. "You almost lost this." Lyra took it with unusual care. "Most people would ask what it means." Lucas smiled faintly, closing the cabinet. "If it matters, you'll tell me when you're ready." For the first time since the crash, Lyra looked genuinely speechless. Before she could answer, hundreds of maintenance notifications flooded every command display. The repaired environmental processors had begun running overdue diagnostics postponed for years. Small autonomous drones rolled out of charging stations across the facility, each carrying identical sealed equipment cases toward inspection points. Their electronic signatures were nearly identical, because Lucas had restored every unit to original factory spec months earlier. Patrol teams scattered after dozens of moving signals, unable to tell harmless maintenance from the 2 fugitives they were hunting. Lucas and Lyra crossed an elevated inspection bridge directly above several squads who hurried after ordinary service robots doing long overdue repairs. No deception software had fooled us. No advanced technology had beaten us. We had simply forgot how a fully functioning station was supposed to run. Drax watched the confusion unfold without frustration. Instead, he studied Lucas's maintenance history in the engineering archives. Every completed repair, every preventive inspection, every restored subsystem formed a pattern stretching back years. The human hadn't built a trap after we arrived. He had been preparing this station every ordinary day of his career, never knowing the Empire would one day be forced to navigate through the quiet excellence of his work. Drax gave up on overwhelming Lucas with numbers. Instead, he turned the whole station into a controlled puzzle. One by one, blast doors sealed around the engineering districts until a single corridor remained open. It led straight to the central reactor level, and every officer around me agreed it was the perfect trap. "He has no other choice," a lieutenant said confidently. Drax shook his head. "No, he has another choice. I just want to see if he notices it." Several decks below, Lucas stopped at the one open corridor and studied a faded maintenance map painted onto the bulkhead, ignoring the bright digital display flashing beside it. Lyra looked at the illuminated passage. "They want us to go that way." Lucas traced an old blue service line on the painted diagram. "That drawing is older than the station computer. I trust it more." He knelt beside a forgotten inspection hatch held by 4 weathered bolts. Working the last one loose with an ordinary wrench, he lifted the cover to reveal a narrow cable conduit barely wide enough for 2 people to crawl through. Dust coated everything. Thick communication bundles stretched into the dark. "Nobody updates old infrastructure," Lucas said. "They just stop remembering it exists." The hidden conduit bypassed 3 security checkpoints and led out beneath the electromagnetic distribution chamber. A section left off every modern navigation file after decades of renovations. Drax immediately ordered the engineering archives opened. Hunting construction records more than 40 years old. Valuable minutes bled away while technicians scanned forgotten blueprints Lucas already carried in his memory. By the time they identified the abandoned conduit, Lucas had entered the enormous distribution chamber, its walls lined with towering induction generators that had once stabilized heavy mining equipment across the station. He walked between the machines, brushing dust from faded identification plates until he found the unit he wanted. "These still have manual controls," he noted with quiet satisfaction. Lyra studied the massive equipment. "Can they stop the Imperial Guard?" Lucas turned a mechanical adjustment wheel. "No, but they can remind modern technology that old engineering still exists." He unlocked a cabinet with a service key from his belt and restored the generators to factory calibration, using handwritten values recorded decades earlier in the maintenance logbook. Nothing sparked. Nothing failed. The generators simply resumed producing the low-level magnetic balancing fields they'd always been designed to create for nearby industrial equipment. Moments later, Imperial Guard units entered the surrounding corridors with advanced tactical displays, precision navigation, and synchronized helmet computers. Their equipment kept working perfectly, yet every positioning system paused again and again to recalibrate against the harmless magnetic fields now flowing through the chamber. Digital maps refreshed. Direction markers drifted by inches before correcting. Formation leaders slowed to confirm every route by hand. Lucas ignored the electronic displays entirely. He followed painted floor markings, faded inspection numbers, and handwritten arrows left by engineers decades ago. Drax opened a channel heard across the level. "Lucas Walker, this operation was never about you. Leave the woman behind and an Imperial transport will return you safely to Earth. Your station stays under your care." Lyra lowered her eyes. Lucas closed the cabinet, picked up his toolbox, and answered in the same calm voice he used on machines. "I don't leave people behind." Silence followed. No speech, no negotiation, one sentence. Lyra looked at him in disbelief. "You still don't know who I really am." Lucas smiled faintly as they moved deeper into the level. "I know enough." Watching the human disappear beyond another junction, while our newest technology slowed itself against infrastructure built generations earlier, I finally understood why every encounter ended the same way. The Empire measured strength by advanced systems and superior resources. Lucas Walker measured it by keeping his word. And somehow that simple promise made one ordinary human impossible for an entire civilization to defeat. The forgotten engineering level grew quieter as they climbed toward the oldest administrative sector, where executives had once planned mining operations long before the Empire ever claimed the facility. Dust-covered offices, faded company logos on cracked walls, forgotten filing cabinets standing exactly where their owners left them. Lucas slowed only once, to straighten a loose electrical conduit hanging from the ceiling before moving on. Lyra watched, incredulous. "You keep repairing things even while the Empire is chasing us." He fixed the conduit with a mounting clip from his toolbox and smiled faintly. "If I already noticed it, I might as well fix it." Before another word, every emergency speaker on the station activated at once. Drax's calm voice carried unmistakable authority. "Your Majesty, this has gone far enough." Lucas stopped walking. Lyra closed her eyes. The silence between them stretched several seconds before Drax continued. "The Imperial Council has searched every frontier for your return. There's no reason to hide any longer." Lucas turned toward Lyra without surprise or accusation. He simply waited. She finally met his eyes, speaking in the same quiet voice she'd used since the crash. "I never wanted you caught up in this." Lucas nodded once. "You're the missing Empress." She lowered her head. "Yes." No dramatic reaction, no anger, no disbelief. Lucas asked only one thing. "Were you running because you wanted to hurt anyone?" "Never." He adjusted the strap on his toolbox and started toward the next corridor. "Then nothing changes." Even over the command network, I heard seasoned officers whispering in confusion. They'd expected fear. They'd expected the human to step away once he learned the truth. Instead, he behaved exactly as he had from the start. Drax tried once more. Lucas Walker, you're protecting the lawful ruler of the Empire. Entire fleets have searched for her. Lucas paused beside an aging wall terminal showing maintenance synchronization records. As he listened, he casually scanned the station log scrolling across the screen. "Right now," he said, "I'm helping someone who needed help." At that moment, an intelligence analyst broke into the command channel. Newly recovered communication archives had turned up inconsistencies in the emergency authorization files, the very files that had justified the entire operation. Drax dismissed the report at once as corrupted data from obsolete equipment. Lucas studied the terminal a few more seconds. Those files were modified after they reached the station. Every voice on the network went quiet. Drax answered carefully. "You have no access to classified Imperial records." Lucas pointed at the display. "I don't need classified records. This station automatically stamps every incoming transmission with the engineering synchronization clock. Your authorization arrived at 8:14. The embedded approval signature says it was created at 8:26. A document can't be approved 12 minutes after it's already been received, unless someone edited it afterward." Our technicians compared the timestamps immediately. The gap was exactly 12 minutes, small enough that every military analyst had glossed over it. An engineer hadn't. Lyra turned toward the nearest surveillance camera, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority I hadn't heard from her before. "Who changed the authorization?" Drax stayed silent in the command center, while one ordinary human exposed a hidden deception using nothing but routine maintenance records. And I finally understood the truth we'd refused to see all day. Lucas Walker never searched for secrets. He simply noticed ordinary details everyone else considered too small to matter, and somehow those forgotten details always led him straight to the truth. The discovery buried in those engineering records spread through the Imperial fleet with astonishing speed. Officers who had arrived believing this was a routine recovery suddenly questioned every order they'd been given. Drax never argued. He requested access to the highest level of operational authority and stepped into the Empire's most advanced command armor. A polished suit wrapped in sophisticated environmental controls, predictive navigation, and intelligent support software capable of adapting to nearly anything. Watching him walk down the administrative corridor, every officer around me believed the balance had finally tipped. Lucas watched the armored commander approach, then looked past him toward a row of aging ventilation grills across the ceiling. Instead of preparing to run, he opened the nearest office and went straight to a shelf of faded engineering binders no one had touched in decades. Lyra followed, baffled. "Why are you looking at maintenance records now?" Lucas pulled a weathered binder labeled Climate Regulation Upgrade Phase 3 and turned the brittle pages until he reached handwritten notes left by engineers who had retired long before either of them arrived. He smiled almost at once. Somebody solved this problem years ago. "What problem?" He pointed to an entry. "The command armor automatically increases internal cooling whenever surrounding airflow exceeds a calibrated threshold during heavy industrial operation. It temporarily prioritizes equipment protection over mobility while it verifies environmental stability." He closed the binder and walked to the environmental control room he'd repaired earlier that day. Every processor ran flawlessly because he'd already replaced worn regulators, cleaned blocked filters, and balanced the airflow across the whole administrative level. He inspected a panel, then eased a single balancing valve. Fresh conditioned air flowed through every duct exactly to the original factory spec recorded decades earlier. Nothing dangerous happened. The station simply did what its designers intended. Drax kept advancing with full confidence until small notifications lit across his helmet display. External airflow exceeded standard calibration. Internal cooling adjusted automatically. Thermal balancing entered protective verification mode. Diagnostic routines quietly activated one after another as the armor confirmed every environmental system stayed within safe limits. The suit remained fully functional, yet its own safeguards temporarily reduced its movement while completing mandatory protection sequences built to preserve sensitive components during unexpected industrial conditions. Drax tried to override the routine. Every onboard computer returned the same verdict. No malfunction existed. The armor insisted on finishing its own protective cycle before allowing full performance. Lucas stepped calmly into the corridor, carrying only his toolbox and the weathered binder. "Your engineers built an excellent system," he said, with respect. "It's protecting itself exactly the way they intended." Imperial technicians urgently recommended remote overrides, but every authorization needed extra confirmation, because the armor kept reporting normal operation, not failure. Lucas hadn't defeated the Empire's greatest technology. He had restored the station so completely that the armor faithfully obeyed its own engineering priorities. Lyra looked at the human beside her with quiet admiration. "You trusted notes written by people you never met." He closed the binder and smiled faintly. "Good engineers leave useful notes." Standing behind Drax while the Empire's finest equipment patiently completed its own safety procedures, I finally understood why every confrontation ended in the human's favor. Lucas Walker never searched for flaws in people or machines. He respected how things were designed to work, and because he understood them so completely, even the most advanced technology willingly revealed its own limits without ever being damaged. The final transmission came just before sunrise over the distant gas giant that filled the station's observation windows. One after another, enormous Imperial vessels dropped out of faster-than-light transit and formed a silent ring around the aging facility. No weapons activated. No commander issued threats. Every ship transmitted the same encrypted authorization code that only one person in the Empire could accept. Lyra stepped into the restored executive command chamber, abandoned for decades. Dust still covered the polished floor, but every console glowed steadily because Lucas had quietly restored power while the station slept. She placed her hand on the central interface once more. This time, no hesitation. The ancient system flared with brilliant white light and broadcast her identity across every Imperial channel. Throughout the fleet, officers stood in respectful silence as the long-missing Empress officially resumed command. Drax removed his armor and lowered his head. "Your Majesty, I accept full responsibility for everything that has happened here." Lyra looked at him calmly. "The investigation will determine responsibility. Truth comes before judgment." While the network celebrated her return, Lucas examined a communications relay beneath the primary console. He tilted his head, then removed a small access panel with an ordinary screwdriver. Lyra noticed at once, "Is something wrong?" He held up a tiny synchronization crystal, no bigger than his fingertip. "This relay is still transmitting delayed copies of outgoing messages." Several intelligence officers checked the communication locks. Hidden duplicate transmissions had continued leaving the station through an independent routing circuit long after the official channels were restored. Whoever had altered the recovery orders had also prepared a final contingency, a way to erase the evidence once the Empress reclaimed authority. Lucas disconnected the aging crystal and set it carefully on the console. The relay was never repaired after an inspection years ago. Someone realized they could use the timing delay to hide copied transmissions. Investigators traced the unauthorized signal within minutes. The concealed routing path exposed the final pieces of the conspiracy. No accusations, no speculation required. Once again, the human had found the answer by noticing an ordinary maintenance detail everyone else had overlooked. Drax approached him slowly. You've protected the rightful ruler of the empire, uncovered falsified orders, restored this station, and preserved evidence that could have vanished forever. Lucas returned the screwdriver to his toolbox. I only fixed what looked broken. Lyra smiled for the first time since the crash. That's exactly why the Empire needs you. Before the assembled fleet commanders and station personnel, she announced her first official appointment after reclaiming the throne. Lucas Walker, I'm asking you to serve as Chief Restoration Engineer for the Imperial Reconstruction Initiative, not because you're the strongest person I've ever met, but because you never stopped caring about the small things everyone else forgot. Lucas looked toward the observation window, where the restored station reflected the light of countless Imperial ships. If it helps people, I'll do the job. Months later, I returned to the station as part of the official historical review. Every corridor ran flawlessly. Every environmental system operated quietly. Every maintenance record carried new handwritten notes beside the old ones, a tradition Lucas refused to abandon. Across the empire, people celebrated the return of their Empress. But among those of us who had witnessed everything from the beginning, another story spread even faster. We had always believed humans became extraordinary only in great battles. We were completely wrong. The most extraordinary human I ever met never conquered worlds, never sought power, and never asked for recognition. He simply repaired every broken thing placed before him, until an entire galaxy realized that the quiet hands capable of restoring forgotten machines could also restore trust, reveal truth, and change the future of civilizations forever.